Happy Wednesday, everyone. So here's what happened. I wanted to bring you Kwik Sew Love Part 2. I did a video a while back about Kwik Sew and why I love Kwik Sew. Or maybe more accurately, what used to be Kwik Sew. More on that later. So I wanted to find out when Kwik Sew had been acquired by the McCall Pattern Company. I wasn't sure which year that took place. And I wound up finding out a whole lot more about the pattern companies that we call the Big Four, or some refer to as the legacy brands. I found out more about them than just about Kwik Sew. And I thought, I don't know if these two subjects clash or go together, but since we all love sewing, I'm just gonna share with you what I found in poking around on the internet yesterday. And I will get back to Kwik Sew and why I'm holding this big bag of patterns, and what I am particularly excited about. I'll show you this. It says free on the cover. It was not free. So we do know that Kwik Sew got its start by a wonderful businesswoman named Kirsten Martensen. She went to work for Viking sewing machines. She was born in Sweden. Viking is a Swedish brand. And as all the new polyesters and stretch fabrics started coming out, Viking asked her to develop some sewing patterns that would utilize their brand new stretch stitch capability on their sewing machines. So she designed 4 sweater patterns, and she ended up coming over to the United States to demonstrate how to use the patterns with the machine with stretch fabric. So she was like an ambassador for Viking sewing machines, and her patterns caught on very quickly. Now, she eventually moved to the United States. She started her pattern company called Knit, Stretch and Sew. Was that it? It's not Stretch and Sew, that's Ann Person, but Kwik Sew was not always called Kwik Sew. So Kirsten Martensen started her company in the late 60s, changed the name of it to Kwik Sew in the early 70s, I believe, and she became a pattern maker. Now, Kwik Sew was known for its fantastic drafting, all the notches matched up, everything sewed together beautifully, and you got what was pictured on the envelope. Now, it might be a whole other subject to talk about those envelope illustrations. I think some of them are pretty bad. But suffice to say, when you sewed a Kwik Sew pattern, you got what you thought you would. And sewers everywhere can appreciate excellent drafting, wonderful instructions, and let's not forget, the Kwik Sew designs were not terribly trendy. Some of them look very dated by today's standards, yes, but most of them were basic, classic designs, some would say with a lot of European sensibility that she brought. And they last through the trends and they last through the years. Kwik Sew was also known for making patterns for segments of clothing that just weren't represented by the Big Four at that time. They made swimsuit patterns, they made lingerie patterns or lingerie. They made dancewear and workout wear long before these were popular pattern categories. Kwik Sew was doing it. So I wanted to find out, when did Kwik Sew become under the umbrella of the McCall Pattern Company, because a lot of people feel like when that switch happened that the Kwik Sew quality started to go down. And that sort of leads into this wonderful pattern book that I scored on eBay. The year of this pattern book is 2015. So we know that the acquisition had to have happened after 2015 because this pattern book was put out when Kirsten was still at the helm of her business. And these, I love going through these patterns, and what I'm trying to do is amass a collection of patterns from this era. And they're all right here that I've gotten so far. What I can tell is that patterns that were marked in the 2000s, like this one is 2886 or 866, and ones that were marked in the 3000 range, here's 3182. When they're in those numbers, they were still part of Kwik Sew. Even ones that have been put out under the McCall's labeling, if they were in the 3000s, the pattern numbers in the 3000s, they were made by and drafted by Kwik Sew. Once they became part of McCall's and they sort of phased out reprinting the older patterns, then they were not drafted by the Kirsten Martensen team, and that's when a lot of folks say their quality started to suffer a bit. I still like current Kwik Sew patterns, and the saddest thing, even with all this shuffling about and rebranding, and I'll get into that in a minute with the Big Four, but the saddest thing to me is that Kwik Sew is no longer making fashion patterns. They've gone to straight crafts, and I think that's a big loss. Even though the trajectory had kind of been declining with their quality, they still put out a good product, and they still kept a lot of the sewing techniques that Martensen pioneered. And she really did bring a lot of the industry techniques to the home sewer. So I think that's a big loss in the sewing world. Now we know that the Big Four has been shuffled around like crazy, and that's what I started to piece together when I was looking up information about Kwik Sew. In 2016, the company CSS acquired the McCall Pattern Company for $14 million. That to me seemed like a bargain because let's not forget, McCall's at that point in time had Butterick and Vogue. So 3 big pattern houses had been consolidated, and CSS bought them all for $14 million. They acquired Simplicity in 2017 for $64 million. Quite a price differential there. But that put all of the Big Four under one company, and it was CSS Industries, I believe. Now, CSS was sold in January of 2020, the year none of us want to remember. Well, we did have some happy events in 2020 because life goes on, but it was not a banner year. I think we can all agree on that. In January of that year, CSS was acquired by IG Design Group. IG stands for International Greetings, and they're a paper company. They deal in gift wrap and greeting cards and decorative paper of that nature. So they acquired CSS, and they're still over there at IG Design. What I couldn't figure out, and I dug quite a bit, was where this company Something Delightful comes in. I believe they have to be a subsidiary of IG Design Group, but if they are, it's hidden pretty well. Something Delightful, that irritatingly named company, now has our beloved Big Four patterns. Big Five. Simplicity, New Look, Butterick, McCall's, Vogue, and Kwik Sew. And I believe it was their decision to get rid of stop drafting fashion for the Kwik Sew line and take it all in the direction of crafts. Pillows, pot holders, stuffed animals, aprons. That's about as close as we'll get to fashion from Kwik Sew from now on. So when Hobby Lobby and Joann have 99¢ and $1.99 pattern sales, grab up those Kwik Sews if you can, if it interests you. So I happened onto a discussion about all the moving around of the Big Four, wherein several people who worked for McCall's or Vogue or Butterick were chiming in. And I found that really interesting to read. All of them across the board were really sad about the shuffling around of these old companies, because Ebenezer Butterick started Butterick in the late 1800s. I think that McCall's was founded at the turn of the century, and Simplicity is an old one, maybe dating back to the 30s. Quintessentially American companies, and they have been shuffled about to a great degree. Now, one person wrote, "It is really heartbreaking to see these companies with a rich history be shuffled around by big corporations. Once McCall's and Simplicity were purchased by CSS, all creative and innovative thinking was thrown out the window." That sounds a little harsh, but she's entitled to her opinion because she worked for these companies. And when they were all consolidated, whether it was CSS or IG Design Group or Something Delightful, when all of this consolidation took place, these companies no longer competed against one another, which, you know, competition is a good thing for a company. It keeps a company on its toes, and it keeps a company putting out a good product and fresh new releases and whatnot. But they weren't competing against themselves for a while. They really had little to no competition. However, they may have seen the independent pattern companies coming up on them in the rearview mirror. But those indie companies have grown into a formidable competition for the Big Four. Now, this opens up a whole new can of worms. Are you pro-indie? Are you pro-Big Four? I don't think we need to do a great big dividing line. Here's what I think. 2020, as bad as it was for business, for people everywhere, if it had a silver lining for the sewing world, it was that a lot of people came to sewing. And they had time on their hands, and they went to a sewing machine for the first time. Rather than divide us between indie patterns and Big Four, and each have their strengths and weaknesses, let's face it, I think that we need to be focusing on keeping these people who have come to sewing for the first time. We need to keep them as customers and keep them sewing. I did read these, it was a very lively discussion on this one forum, and it was a business forum. It wasn't a sewing forum. And one woman was talking about the downside of indie patterns, and another came back with the downside of Big Four. So, to give equal time to both, I'm going to read both of those comments and see if you agree with them or agree with part of them or disagree completely. Sarah had this to say about indie patterns. Quote, "They're very overpriced. They have inconsistent sizing, poor design, lack of originality, lack of convenience, poor knowledge of established and excellent sewing techniques. They attempt to reinvent the wheel, which then falls off." So another person responded, fair enough, but they are not all cut from the same cloth. And I appreciated the sewing pun. So someone else said, well, let's give equal complaint to the Big Four. And she offered this. The Big Four do not draft true plus-size patterns. The quality has suffered. The instructions assume too much sewing knowledge. No copy shop options for PDF. Less variety in pattern designs. And the Big Four underserves an international audience. This is very true. This was a subtopic in this conversation that I was keenly following. And with all of the acquisitions and turnaround of who owns what, one person made this notation, and it's important. She said, the present situation is very messy. Patterns in the UK are very expensive. Americans can afford to buy at sale prices and hoard them, while the same patterns are unaffordable in New Zealand and unobtainable in Canada. And that is a mess. That really is. It's not fair that we here in the United States get these super low price sales. We can buy multiple of the same pattern because if you're shelling out 99 cents, why not? Whereas in the UK, this is not the case. And interestingly, I believe that Something Delightful, the company and website that now represents the Big Four, I think they're based in the UK. So it makes no sense that these sales would not be worldwide or at least in Britain, but they're not. Now, something else we have to thank Britain for is the Great British Sewing Bee. I've only been able to see that show in past seasons and not even the whole season because for some reason it's hard to find and hard to watch over here, and sometimes people will upload it to their blog and then you go to watch it and it's all scrambled and you can't see anything. However, the GBSB, the Great British Sewing Bee, has brought a lot of attention to sewing, just like Project Runway did. And these are wonderful developments in the sewing world because we do not want apparel sewing to just fizzle out. I don't think it will. I think that there is a huge audience for the indie patterns. Younger demographic tends to gravitate toward indies. And they are, on the plus side, they have wonderful instructions. That is what is needed for new sewers. Nothing irks me more, and it just happened to me, than a Big Four pattern that is marked easy to sew or learn to sew for fun, and it's really difficult. I just had a pattern like that, and I'm sure I'll do plenty of griping about it in my makes video. So indie patterns have really filled a need for comprehensive and easy to understand instructions. Not across the board, but several of them do. And if we're talking about Vogue, I know that people who sew the designer Vogue patterns harken back to the glory days of the vintage patterns when the designs were challenging, when they were unique and very different and had fantastic techniques employed for building up a dress or, sewing a corset into a dress and building up the shoulders and the fronts of jackets and really tailor-like techniques. And the modern Vogue designer patterns, well, I wonder what's even happened with the designers, with all of the ownership of the companies being shuffled about. And a lot of people complain that the new designs of the designer patterns, or really just of all the patterns, have gone the easy route and the shapeless route and you know, so simple that you're not really stretching yourself or learning new techniques when you sew them. So there's a lot of room for improvement. What does that have to do with Kwik Sew? Well, let's get back to Kwik Sew, shall we? I found this counter book catalog on eBay. Now, I'm always looking for these catalogs at a good price. A lot of people have put up vintage catalogs and they're very expensive. I have no interest in paying $50 to, oh gosh, I think I saw one on there for $299. A Simplicity or a Vogue from the 70s, no thank you. I did find this Vogue, which is not quite vintage, but it's certainly not current. And it was a Christmas, a holiday edition. So I know they don't do that anymore. I believe the year of this Vogue is roughly 2010, somewhere in there. So the clothing is still very wearable today. Not the era of the giant shoulder pads or 80s and 90s just weren't my favorite for fashion, but 70s and 2000s have really good designs that, you know, you can wear now, that look really cute and not dated. So I got this Vogue catalog for about $11. I thought that was a good deal, so I snatched that up. My Kwik Sew, the guy wanted, I believe he wanted $30 for this. And as I showed you before, it says free right on the cover. But you know, good for him. He got a hold of it. And I surely wanted it. So we settled on $25. That was as low as he was going to come. And I got it. And I said to Brad, it's already paid for itself. I have loved looking at this book so much I can hardly see straight. And when you look at the fashions, I know what you're gonna say. You're gonna say they're dowdy, they're so matronly, those long skirts and those boxy jackets. However, I say look beyond the styling, and in some cases even look beyond the drawings, and you will see clothes that are up to date, that will suffice, they will serve your needs. And some of them are just downright cute. Now, what I do is I look up the patterns in here, and then I go onto eBay and I try to find the patterns there. I've been pretty successful. No, I'm not gonna buy the entire book. I don't sew for children. I don't sew for preteens and babies. And I don't do the crafts. They still had a selection of crafts and bags and hats and pillows and things like that in the back. But I do want to collect a lot of just solid, good patterns like this little purple wrap top. Not wrap top, it's just cinched in there under the bust. I love it. I absolutely love it. And I even love some of the long skirts and boxy jackets. So I'm not going to go through all of these, but at some point I would love to show you my collection. Look at all these leggings, shorts, and they even have the old stirrup pants. Remember those? Where they wrapped around the bottom of your foot. Some of these are considered rare patterns. I know that I sewed this one dress 3559, I believe, and you just plain can't get it anywhere. This is really cute. This came out after McCall's had bought them, but it's still a 3000 number. And this is a golfing set. There are shorts under that skirt. You get the jacket, you get the tank. It's all in there, and I love that. One thing I will say about indie patterns, I don't sew them just because I have such a huge collection of Big Four, but it seems like you don't get a lot of views in an indie pattern. Like they don't give you the jacket, the top, the pants, and the skirt like they might in a big 4 pattern. But that one dress that I sewed, and a lot of people asked me about it and said, where did you get that pattern? This is it, 3559. I have looked and looked, and it has not come up for sale. However, don't lose heart. These patterns come up all the time. I believe there's over 8,000 of Kwik Sews for sale presently on eBay, and there's a ton on Etsy. The trick is finding them at a good price. People know that these are becoming very rare, maybe even collectible, and some people have some audacity. I mean, $35 for a Kwik Sew pattern? I don't think so. The other thing that I noticed is that in looking at my catalog, my Kwik Sew catalog, the sleepwear, these patterns are really hard to find online. They are rare, and if you find them, they're really expensive. There was one that I thought was so darn cute, and I thought, I'm gonna make that. Well, guess again, because I'd love to find it to show it to you. There was only one, and it was on Etsy, and it is one of those, you know, almost $35 ones. Now here it is. It's Kwik Sew 2645 right there in the crease. But it's a beautiful nightgown gathered under the bust, and then it has a little bolero that you can put on over it for when you go downstairs for breakfast. And I thought, that pattern is so beautiful, I'm gonna buy it, but I'm not going to pay $30 or even $25 or $20. I'm a cheapo. I don't wanna pay a ton for these patterns. That said, these Kwik Sew patterns, these are the most I've paid for any of my patterns, except for one McCall's vintage. I paid $11 for it, and that was getting up there. So I would say on average, what I have paid for these older Kwik Sews is about $8 to $10. I better shut up because we're at 27 minutes. Tell me what you think about, don't do the I only sew big 4 or I only sew indie. But what do you think of all the shuffling about? And have you tried to shop on the Something Delightful website? I have. I don't like it, and I don't think a whole lot of people do. There have been problems with it, and there are still some super cheap sales going on in the States. There's one right now at Hobby Lobby. I almost hate to say this for our friends in Canada and Europe and Australia, because they're 99 cents this week at Hobby Lobby, and I know you guys don't have access to that, and I don't think it's fair. But let me know what you think the fate of patterns is. Some people speculate that the big 4 will not even be around in 10 more years, that they will be overtaken by the independent pattern makers, and that they stayed asleep at the wheel too long. I hope that's not the case. But give me your thoughts on patterns. Do you think the designs have suffered recently? Do you sew vintage? Do you only prefer vintage patterns? I love vintage for the fact that you could really see the ink on the tissue paper, and that by getting one size in the envelope, or maybe 3 when they were getting really bold and putting multi-sizes in, I liked that. Because these patterns, I don't sew Jaylee, I've had a look at them, I don't sew Berta magazine, but just the lines almost give me hives. There are so many sizes put onto one piece of paper, and I don't do that. So just give me your thoughts about patterns and what you think. Do you like Kwik Sew? Do you hate them? Did you used to sew them? I love all talk about patterns and sewing, And I'm gonna end this now. It's plenty long enough. Come back and see me on Saturday for my Fabric Mart Fabric-Ista Make. I'm working on it right now, so I'm gonna get back to that, and I'll talk with you soon. Bye everyone, I hope you're having a great week.